A grasshopper sitting quietly in a field and a locust destroying a farmer's entire crop can be the exact same species. Not a relative, not a cousin, the same animal. The only difference between them is something that can happen in about 2 hours. So what actually flips that switch? These are grasshoppers, one of the largest and oldest insect groups on Earth, found on every continent except Antarctica. Most of what you picture when you hear the word locust, ancient plagues, biblical disasters, mindless destruction, comes from a transformation scientists have only recently learned to actually explain. It isn't a different species. It isn't random. It's a specific, repeatable biological switch. And it's happening again right now in North Africa. This is 5 things almost everyone gets wrong about grasshoppers and locusts, and what the science actually says instead. Myth 1. A locust is a completely different insect from a grasshopper, its own species, built differently from birth. It sounds obvious. It's also wrong. Out of more than 12,000 described grasshopper species worldwide, fewer than 20 of them are actually capable of becoming what we call a locust. A locust isn't a separate species, it's a grasshopper, specifically one of those rare species caught in a different behavioral state. Scientists call it a gregarious phase, as opposed to the normal solitary phase that most grasshoppers spend their entire lives in. In its solitary phase, that same insect is shy, green, and keeps to itself, blending into grass and avoiding other grasshoppers whenever possible. Nothing about it looks dangerous, because nothing about it is dangerous. It behaves exactly like the grasshopper you'd expect to find in a backyard. Push that population into crowded conditions, which is exactly what happens after a drought forces grasshoppers to concentrate around the last patches of surviving vegetation, and some of those same species can flip into the gregarious phase. Color changes, behavior changes, wings get stronger, built for long-distance flight instead of short local hops. So the next time you hear locust plague, the accurate version isn't a dangerous species invaded. It's a normally harmless species had a very bad, very crowded week. Myth 2. Swarms just gradually build up whenever there happen to be a lot of grasshoppers around. A slow, vague population effect. That's not what the research actually found. The real mechanism is faster, weirder, and a lot more specific than too many bugs in one place. In 2009, researchers at the University of Cambridge identified the actual trigger, serotonin, the same brain chemical involved in human mood regulation. When a solitary grasshopper gets physically jostled, specifically when something touches the sensitive hairs on its hind legs, the exact contact that happens when grasshoppers get crowded together, its body responds by roughly tripling the serotonin concentration in its nervous system. That single chemical spike is enough, on its own, to flip the insect from solitary to gregarious behavior. Researchers demonstrated this by artificially tickling the hind legs of solitary locusts in the lab. Within about 2 hours, the insects started behaving like members of a swarm, seeking out other locusts instead of avoiding them. 2 hours. Not weeks of gradual population pressure. A specific physical trigger, a specific chemical spike, and a same-day behavioral flip. It's less like a population slowly overflowing and more like a switch being thrown, which is exactly why locust outbreaks can seem to appear so suddenly, even though the underlying biology has been well understood for over a decade. Myth 3. Once a swarm forms, it marches across the landscape as a coordinated unit, working together to find food. That's the image everyone has. The real reason locust bands keep moving is a lot less cooperative, and a lot darker. Researchers studying locust marching bands found that cannibalism is a major driver of the forward march. In a dense band, every locust is after the same limited resources, protein and salt mainly. If one locust stops moving, it risks becoming a meal for the locusts pressing in from behind. So it moves, and moving forward means it runs into the personal space of the locusts ahead of it, who now face the exact same threat and start moving too. One nervous locust triggers the next, which triggers the next, cascading through the entire band. The result looks like a purposeful, coordinated migration. It's closer to a rolling wave of individuals, each one just trying not to be lunch for whoever's directly behind them. Food seeking plays a role too, but the threat from behind is what keeps the whole mass in constant directional motion, even when there's nothing obvious to move toward. It's one of the more unsettling facts in this entire film. The terrifying, unstoppable-looking locust swarm is, at the individual level, mostly just insects trying to stay one step ahead of being eaten by their own neighbors. Myth 4. Locust swarms are bad, but modern reporting probably exaggerates just how big they actually get. Unfortunately, no. If anything, the real numbers are harder to picture than the exaggerated version. And there's a very good reason to care about the exact scale right now. The 2019-2020 East African desert locust plague, called the worst outbreak in 70 years by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, produced a swarm covering more than 2,400 square kilometers. At peak density, that swarm held an estimated 200 billion insects, with up to 80 million locusts packed into a single square kilometer. 200 billion in one connected swarm. This isn't ancient history. As of this recording, a desert locust outbreak is actively ongoing in northwestern Africa, with the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization warning that control measures need to increase to prevent further spread into 2026. A third generation of breeding is expected to produce even larger hopper bands moving into the new year. The same serotonin switch, the same cannibalism-driven marching, happening again, at scale, right now. Understanding the mechanism isn't just a nice biology lesson. It's the actual basis for how agencies predict where outbreaks will spread next, and how early intervention, catching a population before it crosses into the gregarious phase, remains the only real way to prevent a local grasshopper problem from becoming a continental one. Myth 5, and this one has nothing to do with swarms at all. Grasshoppers and crickets are basically the same insect with two different names. They get confused constantly. They are not the same, and the differences are stranger than you'd expect. Start with sound. Male grasshoppers make noise by rubbing pegs on their hind legs against a hardened vein on their forewing, a leg-powered rasp produced during the day. Male crickets make noise a completely different way, rubbing their two front wings together, one edge acting like a file, the other like a scraper, a wing-powered chirp, almost always produced at night. Different instrument, different schedule. Even the ears are unexpected. A grasshopper's hearing organs aren't on its head at all. They're a pair of drum-like membranes on the sides of its abdomen, right near the base of the hind legs, tuned to catch predators, prey, and potential mates from what is essentially its own belly. So a grasshopper you hear buzzing in a sunny field at noon, and a cricket you hear chirping outside your window at night, aren't just two names for the same sound. They're two completely different mechanisms running on two completely different schedules, evolved independently to solve the same basic problem. Two more things worth knowing before we close. First, a single grasshopper can jump roughly 20 times its own body length, accelerating at up to 20 times the force of gravity in the process. Proportionally, the equivalent of an average adult human jumping over 100 feet in a single bound. Breath. Second, and more important, you've probably heard that insects everywhere are vanishing, the so-called insect apocalypse. For grasshoppers specifically, the newest data, presented at the Entomology 2025 Symposium, tells a messier story. Across long-term monitoring sites, about 45% of grasshopper populations are declining, 38% are holding steady, and 17% are actually increasing. That's not a uniform collapse. It's not a uniform recovery either. It's exactly the kind of specific, mixed, unglamorous result real long-term data usually produces, and exactly the kind of nuance a one-line doom headline can't hold. None of this makes grasshoppers simpler. It makes them more remarkable than the myths ever allowed. A harmless field insect and a continent-scale plague, separated by one 2-hour chemical switch. A swarm that looks coordinated, but is mostly just outrunning its own neighbors. A population story that resists easy headlines in either direction. The outbreak in Northwest Africa is still unfolding as this was written. Maybe that's the real takeaway. The science here isn't a settled museum fact. It's live, ongoing, and still being written in real time.